Hello, hello. Today we got our running back rankings 1 through 50 to kind of end this series of rankings, and we'll still have a couple more videos coming out before the NFL Week 1 season. But first off, I will say thank you guys a ton for 100,000 followers on TikTok. It means the world to me. Never thought that would happen, so appreciate you guys a ton. But starting at number 1, like most people, I do have Bijan Robinson, and I feel like for a number 1 overall player, there isn't even that much to say. He's in his prime, fully healthy, in a great situation, good offensive line, good receiving, goal line work. He is projected for the number 1 volume of any running back and is one of the most talented running backs in the league. So when you have one of the top talents getting the number 1 volume and a really good offense, they're going to be the number 1 overall player. If we're looking at some splits, last year after that slow start where he was kind of averaging only 13, 14 points per game in those first month or so, he averaged 22.8 the rest of the way. He basically had 20 plus fantasy points every single game. And then he had 24 plus fantasy points in all 3 starts with Michael Penix, which is encouraging. That's like the one risk is, how does he act with Michael Penix? But we got 3 games in there. He averaged 27 a game and scored 24 in every single one of them. So overall, just in a great spot there. Him, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Saquon are all pretty close. And CMC, honestly, too. He's definitely in there, just obviously injury risk there. But Jahmyr Gibbs is my number 2 guy. He is the best fantasy player available if Montgomery were to go down. That is like the biggest factor is if Montgomery were to ever miss games, he averaged 33 points per game last year in the 3 games without Montgomery. I don't think that's a fluke. His volume just goes up a ton because he doesn't get the number 1 volume. He's just incredibly talented and in another amazing situation there. So last year we saw that in fantasy playoffs. If you had him in the fantasy playoffs, you probably won your game. There is a couple worries there, but I think he is built to overcome it. So that's why I have him on my number 2 guy compared to, say, 3 or 4. Even above guys like a CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson that I like still. The things are, 1, Ben Johnson left, obviously. And 2, Frank Ragnow, their center, is now gone. And a great stat from Nate Tice, the success rate on runs in the couple of games that Ragnow missed went from 3rd best in the NFL to 23rd. It was a very small sample size, but still, that's a pretty big gap for one center. So we'll see how that overcomes. He does get goal line work, so I know he's a smaller back, and Monty is seen as like one of the best goal line backs in the NFL. He still had the 6th most attempts. They run the ball down there a ton, and it's still a lot of it going to go to Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe more creative ways compared to just slamming up the A-gap with Montgomery, but he still gets a lot of work down there. He is the best receiving back in the NFL with Christian McCaffrey. Overall, the volume isn't a negative. He had the 11th best last year with a few games that Monty missed, but the thing for this year is there's been talks about that volume increasing. He is now the starter in training camp at this time of year. Last year, Montgomery was the 1A, technically, in terms of how they utilize them, but now he is going out initially with those starters. His projected volume is 8th, so even though it was 11th with a few games without Monty, 17 games with Monty, he's still projected higher amounts. So I like that overall. I still think he's a beast. Like, he's in the middle of his prime again. Running backs at this age with this talent and this situation, it's a really hard time to miss. Saquon Barkley, it's one of those things where a lot of people, I feel like the main worry is his touches. I think it's overblown. Ian Harris, I love that man, tweeted a joke yesterday, something about how, like, thank God Bijan didn't have 15 more touches or else he would be screwed screwed for this year if he had 15 more touches last year. And it's very true. Like Saquon, he has had 20 plus touches per game in 5 of his 6 career seasons. Didn't stop him from being the overall RB1 last year. There's other factors in there, sure. He did have a great stat from Dwayne McFarland. I have a couple stats from other people today. 54% of his rushing touchdowns last year came on 20 plus yard runs. Just a ridiculous amount. Maybe that drops down by a couple just because that's an insane amount and the Eagles ran more than anybody in these last 5 years. But still, that offensive line is still good. The offense is a juggernaut. He's going to have tons of scoring opportunities. The goal line attempts are there even with Jalen Hurts there. The receiving isn't incredible, especially last year with Jalen Hurts, but he's still an amazing running back. Yeah, maybe a little more injury risk, but he's not built like a Devon Achane, where you have injury risk for more of a logical reason. He is built like a tank. And if anybody can overcome having 300 touches being fine the next season, it's going to be him, especially with how they utilize him as a runner in that offensive line It's not like they're just jamming him up at A-gap like Montgomery, like I just said, behind a bad offensive line. Like, it's not as much of a wear and tear situation because he's just breaking off these runs in an open space a bunch, making people miss compared to just being destroyed. Christian McCaffrey is that number 4 guy, and a stat that I tweeted out today that I love. He has been drafted first overall 3 times in his career. Incredible feat. But he finished as the RB54, RB38, and RB69. All 3 times kind of ruined your season if you draft him 101. But there's also been, since his rookie season ended, 4 times, this would be the 5th year, where he is not drafted as the 101. And in those seasons, he is the RB2, the RB1, the RB2, and the RB1. In both times that he was the RB1, if you had him, you basically won. He scored 100 more points than the second place guy one year and 157 more in 2019. Just an insane ceiling. The best fantasy player of all time in terms of flex players' points per game in their career. He's ridiculous. The one thing with Purdy is his targets go down a hair, but they use him better as a runner. And the offense being so good does make up for that compared to being in Carolina, say, back in the day. But in his career, he averages 7.4 targets per game with other quarterbacks. Purdy, that goes down to 5. Part of that is just the offense, but even I think a couple of games that Purdy didn't play when he was there, his targets were up a little bit, but still number 1 route share in the NFL last year in those 3 games. He was still amazing last year when he was actually healthy. The year before that, the RB1. If he is healthy, which everything out of camp saying he's really healthy, then he's probably the RB1 overall whenever he's playing. That's the thing. Like week 2, I think everybody's rankings or maybe even week 1, everybody's weekly rankings will be like, oh yeah, CMC is the RB1 this week. That's not the reason that he's going RB4. It's because of the injuries, age, yeah, a little bit. Brian Robinson trade just happened an hour ago. Does not affect anything for him. I think all of Brian Robinson's touches, or almost all of them, at least in terms of actually putting a big dent in CMC's workload, his workload is coming from the other backups. Yeah, he'll steal from Guerendo and whatever other healthy running back they finally have, but they had like 5 that were injured, then just CMC healthy. I'm not worried about him at all, especially since they are very different styles. And CMC doesn't need a guy to come in and take the goal line work. He's an incredible goal line back too, even at his size. That next player is Derrick Henry. I have a trivia question for you. Who has led all running backs in yards per carry 4 of the last 6 seasons? This would be a really bad trivia question if the answer was Derrick Henry, but it's not. It's the Baltimore running back. 6 years with Lamar Jackson, and the number 1 guy in yards per carry has been whoever's starting for Baltimore. They are just ridiculous in that offense because of Lamar Jackson's ability to take away defenders and get a bunch of attention. And we saw that happen last year. That's why he was so good, is he goes from a ground and pound Tennessee offense where everybody and their mother knows that they're running the ball to Lamar Jackson where, yeah, they're running the ball a lot, but they aren't just keying in on Derrick Henry. And they can't just put 8 guys in the box like they did in 2023 when he played the most against 8-man boxes. So now he's in a situation where Lamar's taking a bunch of attention away. He gets those explosive carries because those holes are so much bigger because that defensive end or that outside linebacker that's crashing down has to wait and is Lamar taking it? And then he doesn't. Gives Derrick Henry, and his efficiency is the best in the NFL on the ground, at least. It's not even close. And when you have a guy, yeah, there's the risk of his age. I get that. He's Derrick Henry. Hasn't affected him much, and there hasn't been signs of a decline, so that's the big thing for me. When we're looking at the offense, incredible offense, and Lamar is not running at the goal line. Derrick Henry led the NFL in percent of the goal line touches. 91% of those touches, carries, came to Derrick Henry. So without any signs of slowing down, and he's been a top 4 running back in 5 of his last 6 years, not too much has changed in Baltimore. Yeah, I like him over a guy like Genty, which I feel like is the big question for a lot of people. So we get outside that top 5. I do have Genty right above that next level. You can get the guys below him for a lot cheaper, I would say. Genty, there's not too much to say as a rookie coming in. We don't have too much stats, but when we're looking at college, the missed tackles forced, according to PFF, since the 2014 when they started tracking that stuff, he is number 1 by over 35 in a season last year. 150 missed tackles. The next guy is 115. So he had that Bijan level of work. And the big misconception, I don't know if I would say it's a misconception. Like, I get it, but people were like, oh, well, he was playing, the Mountain West teams. They weren't playing anybody that was good. My argument against that is, sure, he had some games that he blew up against UNLV when they were a ranked team. UNLV wasn't that bad. But the big thing for me is, one, he's a running back. That's what matters the least a bit in terms of moving into the NFL. But the main thing is his team was also a Mountain West team. Like, they had a quarterback that wasn't the greatest, an offensive line that, yeah, they were good for the Mountain West. They aren't good against the Big Ten. So when he has games like Oregon, who has a top 5 defensive line in college football, and they are matched up against Boise State's offensive line, and Genty goes for over 200 yards and 40 fantasy points, well, is that excuse still valid now? Like, he's in a horrible situation in games like that, and he's still dominated. So what does that say for him? And then we look at his receiving. He led the country in receiving as a running back in 2023. Like, it's all there. All there. I think that the risk of Genty is a little overblown of him being a rookie, partially because of recency bias with Bijan. If we look at that ceiling even, there has been a top 3 rookie running back 4 times in less than a decade. In these last 9 seasons, we've had 4 of them. So when people talk like, oh, like, yeah, he's going to be good, but he'll just hit his ADP. I wouldn't say that's necessarily true. If he hits big this year, he'll hit big, just like anybody else can. He has a great coaching staff. The running scheme is good there. They're going to run the ball a lot. Carroll with the rookie Kenneth Walker, when he was named the starter, he got 21 touches per game. Like, there's nobody else really in that room. And we look at the other running backs that are drafted top 25. He was drafted top 10, high in that top 10. There's been 10 other running backs in this past decade that's been drafted in the top 25. Every single one of them has been a RB8 or better by year 2. I know I've said that stat before, but when we're looking at that, the 3 that didn't in year 1, like your Todd Gurley's or Jahmyr Gibbs or all those sorts of guys, it's because of their situation wasn't as good. It was Josh Jacobs, Bijan, and Melvin Gordon that waited until year 2. But we're looking at that, well, Bijan had a much worse situation with Arthur Smith compared to Ashton Genty. Jacobs was an RB2, but he was kind of that later first-round pick, wasn't getting that elite level volume yet. Melvin Gordon struggled, but that was, again, he's not Ashton Genty. I think he's a lot better player than a lot of those guys already because of where he's drafted, but also the situation is really good, which is usually the problem for those first-year guys if they don't work out. Overall, I think he's really good. There's a lot of running backs in this range that I like, so he's kind of right above these next 2 guys that I love, but I think he's really solid. Next 2 is Bucky Irving and Chase Brown. Bucky, another one of those guys where he's not just a rusher or goal line guy. He had the 9th most targets among running backs after he was named the starter in week 5, and his efficiency was incredible. It was incredible. Even as a rookie, as a 4th-round pick, 3rd-round pick, something like that, I forget. But we're looking at it. His volume wasn't amazing on the entire season. It was 25th. This year, he is projected for the 13th best. So already you're looking like, oh, okay, well, obviously the volume is going to be a lot better, especially with Rachaad White injured on top of that. But they're already talking about increasing his volume more and more with Rachaad White healthy. So that's why I think he can be so good this year. Is I think he's going to get a lot more volume than people expect. His points per snap last year was 6th. So if he gets that volume and he keeps that points per snap level like you'd expect with guys like the Jahmyr Gibbs, James Cook, Derrick Henry, those type of guys that were also up top with that stat, if you're increasing that volume, that's where he has that clear RB1 upside. The missed tackles forced per attempt, one of those big efficiency stats. He was 3rd best in the NFL as a rookie. He's so much better than Rachaad in terms of stats like that. Rachaad White's a great receiving back, but in terms of a rusher, he is not a threat as much as people would probably expect compared to Bucky Irving. I think that volume is just going to be so much better this year, and he's such a good running back in such a good offense, good offensive line. I like it a lot. Great touchdown upside as well. Chase Brown, if I hid every single player's name and just gave you pure stats, no opinions, a lot of people would have Chase Brown ranked a lot higher than RB12. I think that's a little ridiculous. If you wanted to draft Chase Brown RB7 or 6 in front of Genty or Irving or even Henry, like up to RB5, I'm fine with it. Like, that tier for me is not that wide. So we got him at RB8 right now. He's being drafted RB12 in the top of the 3rd round right now. Just the stats I was talking about. He had 7 targets per game, after the Moss injury, that was number one in the NFL for running backs, obviously. He had RB3 level production in terms of points per game, and he had the number one volume overall. So number one targets, number one volume, number three in points per game for a large majority of the season. Zach Moss is now gone for good, and he's being drafted RB12. There is no signs at all of losing volume. Taj Brooks comes in, and he's clearly a handcuff backup. He's solid there, but he's also similar to Chase Brown. Like, he's not like a complimentary guy to Chase Brown. And you can say, well, the offensive line is so bad, all that sort of stuff. They were 31st last year. They can't get worse. And he was the RB3 in points per game. That kind of puts a hole in that argument. And two, I would say they could be okay. Honestly, like, they are switching around that interior offensive line. They have pretty good tackles. If they can stay healthy and one of those two or both of those new offensive guards can work out in Cincinnati, well, then they're only going to get better. They're not going to be worse. That's one thing. So the offensive line can really only get better there. And he's getting 100% of the goal line work. It's not as much. He led the NFL in snaps inside that 5-yard line among running backs, but he only had 16 opportunities in terms of carries and targets. But he's still in there every single play. He'll definitely get those opportunities. The touchdowns are his to have. And I think he'll get even more goal line opportunity work this season. I like him a lot. He's one of my favorite players this season. I'm shocked that on this offense and without the change and the defense still being bad, that he's going this low. I don't really get it. The next guy for me is Achane. Similar in a way where he is just as good as these guys, and at his peak, he is better. But with the calf injury and the injury concern overall, it's hard for me to rank him above any of these guys because they are really close. Like, if Chase Brown hits and Devon Achane hits, Achane will be 1 point per game, 2 points per game better. If they both miss, that probably means Achane's getting 0 and Chase Brown's getting like 13, 14 points per game. I don't know. But I feel like there's a lot more risk to be drafting him this high. I never was taking him in the first round, but always liked him as an early second round pick. But with this news, with Ollie Gordon kind of rising up a little bit, yeah, the receiving is incredible. Last year, he was number one among running backs when Tua was playing, and the biggest stat that's just ridiculous is receptions by running backs. In weeks where Tagovailoa was playing, he had 67. The second best running back was 40. He almost doubled the second place guy in receptions. It's ridiculous. The volume is better than people would expect just because of that receiving and him still getting goal line work despite being 185 pounds. So he's amazing, but there's some problems there. The offensive line isn't great. His efficiency dipped because of that last year, even though he's still really good. There could be more backup running backs working in. Mostert's gone, but he didn't really do anything in that second half of the year especially. So the calf can't put me above these top guys, but I still like him overall. Josh Jacobs is a weird one because I didn't love him for a variety of reasons, but the main one being I loved him so much last year because Marshawn Lloyd was hurt, and now he's back, and then now he's hurt again. So it's like, oh, well, am I just thinking of the exact same last year? And it worked last year, especially in that second half of the year. He started off slow, but he had 15 touchdowns in his final 11 games. I don't know if that's going to keep up. With Jordan Love healthy, he was a top 6 running back. But also now if he's actually fully healthy, as in not just playing, but healthy, do they throw more? Is he going to get 22 goal line carries and lead the NFL again? Is he going to have 16 rushing touchdowns again? So there's some things there where because the offensive line isn't amazing and his targets dipped a bunch last year from 4.5 to 2.5, it's tough for me because I feel like there is some risk factors staring us in the face there, where as a power back, A-B gap runner, when the offensive line isn't amazing, he's got a really good offense, but it was already kind of peaked out last year in terms of production there, in terms of benefiting off the offense. He scored a bunch of touchdowns and was kind of that lower level RB1. So I don't think he has that top 5 upside that some of these guys above him have, but I do still think he's a really good option because of Marshawn Lloyd. The worry there with Marshawn Lloyd and those other backups is Matt LaFleur in those first 5 or 6 years always split running backs. Even when he had a guy like Aaron Jones, he never had 300 touches. So Josh Jacobs was his first running back ever to have 300 plus touches. And they've always kind of talked about like, hey, we want to get Marshawn Lloyd more work and Emmanuel Wilson, whoever it is, but they just haven't had the guys healthy and talented enough to take it away from Jacobs. So I think he's kind of just going to be a low-end RB1 again this year. Solid, don't love him, don't hate him. Jonathan Taylor right after that With no Anthony Richardson, he averaged 20 points per game last year. And that was 20 points per game without great quarterback play. It wasn't really a good offense in general, but he still averaged 20 points per game, partially because he had the second most opportunities per game in terms of carries and targets. It just all kind of comes down to how good is this offense going to be. He's that clear number one guy. He's going to probably lead the NFL in touches, I would say, if he had 17 games or at least close to it with Daniel Jones back there. The low targets makes it dangerous. Maybe that raises up a little bit with Daniel Jones this year, but there's still that same type of thing. I think he's going to be a low-end RB1, but not a top 5 guy because of the lack of touchdowns as that style of runner because of the offense and lack of receiving. He has been a top 5 running back one time in 5 seasons, so I feel like he's kind of always drafted around that top 5 range, but he's never really a top 5 fantasy ceiling guy. So that's what makes me have him down here below guys like an HM, a Josh Jacobs, all those other ones. And then we get to Kenneth Walker, and he's just one of those guys where if you were to guarantee me 17 games Kenneth Walker, he would probably be my RB5, RB4 behind those top elite guys. He is ridiculously good at football, everybody. He's ridiculously good at football. He had dominant analytics last year behind a bad offensive line. And now you have this new coaching coming in with new offensive line, at least a little bit better. They drafted Zabel, which looks incredible in the first round as that interior guy where they really struggled. They mix up this running scheme a little bit, which worked in New Orleans really well. This outside zone scheme, it's very similar to what Bijan is doing in Atlanta. So we got Kenneth Walker in this, which is what he succeeded in when he was at Michigan State in college, if you remember that one insane year after he transferred. So he had that 40% avoided tackle rate. Everybody in the NFL is between 15 and like 28% is the second best, and then he's over there at 40. He's insanely good, better receiving than you'd think. He gets a ton of goal line work. He's one of 4 guys in the last 2 years to have 1 goal line attempt per game on average. So everything is looking up. People are just worried about the injury. And part of me wants to say that it's a little overblown, in my opinion. I love Charbonnet, and I think he's a great handcuff, and obviously there's a little more injury risk with Walker. But at the same time, how many guys have we seen in the NFL that are labeled as injury prone, and then they kind of have 3 years in a row where they don't get injured, and they're like, oh, yeah. It was kind of that way with Keenan Allen for a bit. Like everyone just saw him as this big like injury prone guy, and then he played like 5 seasons in a row and missed 2 games, and they're like, oh, never mind, maybe he just got unlucky. And Walker is kind of that way for me. He's played 3 seasons in the NFL. He is young. How many games do you think he's missed in his career? 20%. He's played 80% of games. It's not anything like a career-ending or season-ending injury that he's had that he's dealing with. It's all been minor stuff. And yeah, he's had some games where he's limited or maybe left early. But in terms of games played, he's played 80% of games. He plays like 13 games every single year. So it's weird for me that he has such a bad rep in terms of that. And the coaches in Seattle love him. It goes back a little bit, but when the coaches first came in, I'm talking like February, they just talked about how much they loved Walker, how he's going to fit perfect in a scheme, how they want to get him the ball a ton. We're just going to give the ball to Walker every single play. And with his talent in a better situation, if he stays healthy, oh my gosh, I love him. So I know it's a risk when you're using a round 4 pick on him, but I love this man. I love this man. Mike LaFleur, not Matt LaFleur, but Mike LaFleur, Rams offensive coordinator, this week said this about Jarquez Hunter a couple days ago. The more opportunities he gets, the better it's going to be. And it's a lot of stuff like that that is kind of keep on being said about Jarquez Hunter, but just about the Rams running back situation in general. Kyron got paid. That's actually a big help. But still, they love Jarquez Hunter. You just look at that video of them on draft day when they're picking him. And it's one of the many, many reasons that I'm worried about Kyron Williams. One, he is not the most talented running back in the NFL. When we're comparing him to like Kenneth Walker I'm just talking about, he's not that. The efficiency numbers aren't popping off the page. He's really solid because it's a great offensive line. It's an amazing situation in Los Angeles. He produces and is successful in what he does, but he's not this guy that is really a game changer. And when we're bringing in guys like Blake Corum, I'm not really huge on, but Jarquez Hunter I think has a lot of potential, it gets scary. Like Rachaad White last year, scary because he's completely volume dependent, in my opinion. If Rachaad White had a guy that was brought in that was better than him, suddenly that volume disappears. And that's what happened with Bucky Irving last year. And I'm not saying that Jarquez Hunter is Bucky Irving. I'm just saying there's a lot of risk with Kyron Williams because he has incredible volume and he's completely dependent on that staying the same. So he has the 6th best volume last year and he had the RB14 finish in terms of that adjusted finish last year in points per game when we're looking at everybody's normal situation. He was third to last in explosive carry rate, and he had 5 fumbles in terms of just like risk of him getting taken off the field. But last year, he led all running backs in snaps, percentage of snaps at like 85%, and points per game coming from the goal line. So he's always been a good goal line back. But the year before, he had 4 points per game, also really high. But he had 5.2 last year. So just say we would expect that to go down to somewhat normal. Say he drops to second best in the NFL. Well, that's already like a point and a half off his points per game when he was the RB14-ish. And then his volume, if he doesn't keep his 85% snap share, he's not really getting any receiving there because they don't target running backs. The Rams are dead last 2 years in a row now. So it's just tough. It's tough. He doesn't really have as much of a ceiling because you kind of expect him now as just being that lower end RB1 as his peak. And it can really only get worse despite being in a great situation. I think he's really good as an RB2 if he kind of can keep some of that, or not some, but the majority of that volume. But there's just a lot of risk there, and it's a lot of risk that isn't really paired with the upside of a guy like Devon Achane with a similar situation. Marion Hampton is right after that. I'm not overly worried about the offense coordinator talk in terms of Greg Roman talking about it being a committee. You're always going to have that RB2 even with Najee out. Honestly, he is so much better than Najee Harris, and Najee's injured too. So that's just like playing 2 running backs doesn't necessarily mean 50-50 split. So it's kind of a JT situation in Indianapolis, except with a better offense. So the volume isn't going to be as high or as guaranteed. Receiving is still going to be low, but the goal line work is amazing, and the offense is a lot better than it is in Indianapolis. So I think we can still be really valuable here, even without the receiving, because of the offenses that he's in, because of the talent that he has, and the potential volume that I still think will be pretty high, especially with Najee being injured. I wasn't too high on him until that injury, but with him kind of being there, Najee wasn't in LA before, so we got to remember that. He's coming in for the first time, and the rookie is the guy in training camp getting all the first team reps while Najee's on the sideline and has never played with this team or coaching staff. So that's the big one there for me. I like Hampton. I think his potential can be huge. The Saints are so garbage, but he's receiving reliant. Last year, 50%, 50.6, so over 50% of his points came from receiving. He's a running back, and over half his points came from receiving. Breece Hall, same way in his RB2 season, the guy after this actually too. So there's lower upside because of the team, and the rushing is just solid. The touchdown upside definitely lower at this point in his career. The car checkdowns are gone. That's a problem. He was always checking it down a ton. But still, there's positive. Of one, he's still going to have the receiving. He had the #1 volume of any running back last year, partially because of that receiving, obviously. I think Kellen Moore is a good replacement. Clint Kubiak was really good for Kamara, still led in every single receiving category in terms of targets, rec, and receiving yards. But Kellen Moore, I don't think that'll stop with him, and he's still a really good play caller overall. So I don't think that the ceiling is necessarily there, given a lot of different factors, but mainly just the Saints offense. But if you need a running back and you're kind of like searching for one and you haven't really picked one early on because they've been taken right before you, I don't think Kamara is a bad option. The volume is still there. The receiving is still solid. And yeah, he's 30, but he's 30. He's not 33. I think some people forget that too. Breece Hall right after that, when he was an RB2 2 years ago in points per game, 55% of those points came from receiving. So when you got a guy that does check down like a Derek Carr level, Justin Fields is #1 in his 6 games played last year, it can be really good there. That's something that Aaron Rodgers didn't really give him. His receiving points per game dipped by about 30% last season compared to the rest of his career. The problem is Justin Fields good? I don't think so. I don't know how good this offense is going to be. And when they are at the goal line, Justin Fields does take about 40% of those goal line carries throughout his career. So that's another worry there. I think in terms of the rushing efficiency, it should improve a lot. And I don't see people talking about that. That offensive line is a little bit better, or a lot better. And Justin Fields, like Lamar Jackson, like Jenny Daniels, can take some of that attention away, open up those spots, and an explosive runner like Breece Hall, if you give him a little bit more room that Justin Fields can provide, that's when those explosive carries can come back in, which did not happen with Aaron Rodgers last year, who's the exact opposite of that, obviously, with a worse offensive line. So I think, yeah, is that volume going to be as good this year as the touchdown upside there? Maybe not, but I think he's still an extremely talented player, still a lot better than Braylon Allen, I would say, although he's a good handcuff, and he can be a lot more efficient this year in this offense. So if the offense is having good days, if it's a good matchup, I really like Breece Hall in those spots. There's just obviously worries with it too. But in terms of a talent, I still think he's got it and completely fine. In Dynasty, I've got him and I'm happy with it. There's some weird rumors there in terms of like trade stuff and him kind of tweeting some weird things, but I don't want to look too much into it. After that is Chuba Hubbard, another guy who I think is underrated in both his situation and his talent. I feel like I kind of like him better than where I have him ranked, if that makes sense. At least compare, like I feel like his ADP, I bet I have him higher on the big board than I do in terms of running back rankings. I have him above guys like James Cook and James Conner, which a lot of people don't. But talent-wise, 51% of his yards last year came from over the expected, which was the best in the NFL according to Next Gen Stats. And then when Bryce Young returned, he averaged 17 points per game. In week 8 to 18, when Bryce Young got benched, then he came back, and Chuba Hubbard was incredible the rest of the year, and that receiving took an uptick. He led the NFL in goal-line attempts per game, and they were 18th in red zone trips. So even if he loses a little bit of that, if the offense is a little better than last year, that goal-line usage is incredible. I'm not overly worried about Rico Dowdle. I think he's kind of just a guy, a jag, as they say. I'm not super worried about this offense in general because the offensive line is so good. So he had the RB5 volume last year. He's projected for 12th this year, but still really good. And his offensive line is like a top 10 run blocking offensive line. If Bryce Young is good, he could be incredible. If Bryce Young is the same as he was last year, he can be good. That's how I see it. James Cook, it's not the Rashad Bucky situation, but I do think it's kind of more comparable to like this year's RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins. They're both pretty good, above average running backs, but neither really separate themselves. And when I say them, I'm talking James Cook and Ray Davis. Their efficiency metrics last year were basically identical. James Cook wasn't incredible, and he also had the 26th ranked volume last year. That's a little worrisome for me because there is a billion signs of him declining in areas. He had 40% of his fantasy points coming from touchdowns. 36 was just rushing touchdowns, most in the NFL, and it's pretty impossible to replicate. Every single player in the past decade at least, I could check longer, and it'd probably be the same story. Every single player has declined in terms of both touchdowns and basically all of them in points per game. We look at his touchdowns per game, it was number 2 in the NFL behind, I think, Gibbs, but Gibbs was the RB1 in total points. James Cook was 11th. So if he goes from 2nd to 10th, which would still be amazing, well, where does that leave him? If he scored 12 touchdowns last year, which I would be ecstatic with. If I had James Cook and he scored 12 touchdowns, awesome. Or in general, if my running back is scoring 12 touchdowns, incredible. He would be the RB20. He had 4 points from receiving last year per game. That was a big dip compared to 6.6 in 2023. There's just lots of red flags. It's a great situation. Though with Josh Allen down there, he does take a lot of those goal line carries. It's a lot of goal line sneaks that he'll have. James Cook, under 50% of those goal line attempts in general. The receiving isn't really there to make up for it. Ray Davis is a threat there. I don't know. He's not this incredible Saquon Barkley level talent. And I think people will just see him be really good in fantasy for a couple of years and kind of the hype building. And now he's kind of being drafted as that RB1 expectant guy, which I don't think he's going to repeat as an RB1 this year. That's just my take. James Conner, after that, I am not a Benson believer. It's kind of the opposite in terms of those two running backs, and you got those younger guys. I don't think Trey Benson is the Ray Davis, in my life at least. 17 touches per game every season with Drew Petzing as their coordinator, which is 2 years. But both years with Drew Petzing as his coordinator. 17 touches per game. Murray checked it down a bunch. His efficiency is still in the top right of those graphs, and Benson's not. And he has a lot worse volume, which usually means if you have better volume or worse volume, then your efficiency should be a little better to make up for it. But James Conner is another level above. So even at his age, he's kind of like Derrick Henry in the way that he hasn't shown, not like Derrick Henry, but in a way that hasn't shown signs of a dip yet. He was top 5 in efficiency last year as a 30-year-old running back. So it could fall off this year a little bit, but I think it would fall off near the end of the year and not affect him too much in terms of fantasy. You kind of want to get out the year after that happens, not the year before if there's no signs of it yet. So I'm fine with it. I don't think he's going to be an RB1. I also don't think he's going to be an RB3. And I don't think Benson's going to take 50% of the work. But that's just my thoughts. RJ Harvey, another rookie here, where compared to Javonte Williams, who was in Denver last year, is way more explosive. Just 10 times more explosive. I love Javonte coming out of college and in year 1, But ever since those injuries have happened, it hasn't been the same, and the Broncos have been looking for somebody. And Sean Payton, the offense and the Broncos situation and the quarterback, it's a dream. I've talked a lot about it a lot. I know, it's already annoying. But the Broncos offensive line, incredible. The check down rate, incredible. Their usage in the screen game, amazing. Sean Payton is in love with him. They drafted him very high. He's a good player in an amazing situation. So you have J.K. Dobbins is there, but he's in a situation where he can get goal line work and receiving and a good offense and still be productive in his normal carries. So there's so much to love there, and he does have the potential of kind of being, like, if I had to choose one between Harvey and Dobbins to be an RB1 in fantasy, like, I would choose Harvey. So Dobbins I still like later on, but Harvey has a ton of upside in such a good situation here. I really like him. Travion Henderson right after that. I am scared that he is going to be disappointing in fantasy. I think the most likely outcome at the end of the year is that he's going to be awesome and just okay in fantasy. Hopefully the second half of the year is when he kind of is peaking, like a lot of these rookies do. That is the big thing for me in terms of still having him ranked this high. I don't think I'm going to move him up at all. If anything, maybe down a few spots, but I think honestly like he's pretty locked in here where he's at because he's got incredible upside, but we're looking at a situation. He is one of 3 running backs there that I think they will be using. My little inside sources in New England basically saying Ramondre is still going to be that starting guy to start off the year. They're still going to use Antonio Gibson, Travion Henderson, in an offense that is hopefully average, an offensive line that is hopefully not horrible, and he's one of 3 running backs. So he's going to have to count on those big plays that he's known for. But if he's not getting 16, 17 touches a game, and he's only getting 12 on that offense, then I feel like it's going to be a lot of week-to-week guesswork and a lot of weeks that he's really good and a lot of weeks that he's not as good. So there's some worries there, but I do have him above a guy like David Montgomery because I feel like he's kind of the opposite here, where he has maxed out his ceiling. He is, in terms of handcuff value, the number 1 guy, yeah, but we're not really drafting Montgomery as a handcuff. It'd be ridiculous to draft a handcuff this high. But we're looking at a situation, last year it couldn't have gotten better. He was RB16 in points per game on good volume, and now loses that center that affects him a lot more than Jahmyr Gibbs, loses Ben Johnson, and the volume is likely to decrease. So last year he was on the offense that was number 1 in scoring. He was number 1 in fantasy points per snap. Both amazing things, but it can't get too much better. And he wasn't the RB1 in fantasy, he was RB16. So I think that ceiling is shot because there's all those rumors about basically Gibbs is going to get more volume. He's entering his prime or is in his prime, and he's going to be getting more of that volume over Devontae Montgomery. He's not really starting in training camp like I was talking about earlier. So I think RB16 isn't really possible this year if Gibbs is healthy. I think RB20-ish is closer to his ceiling. A great floor because he's an amazing player overall. But is he going to be an RB1 this year at any point without Gibbs being injured? Not really. So I think he's kind of just that flex play that could be an RB1 as a handcuff as well. And that's why I have him around this range. DeAndre Swift after him. I don't mean this to offend people. He hasn't been a good NFL running back in a while, I would say. Early on, he was pretty solid his first year or 2 in Detroit. But it hasn't been great. Last year, I know it wasn't 100% his fault. The running back or the run blocking wasn't horrid, I would say. I would say it was slightly below average based on the metrics. The pass blocking, similar, and Caleb Williams had some problems there. But I say that because he was dead last in success rate. He was also last by a mile in terms of rushing yards over expected, the NGS stat, Next Gen Stats. So when you're dead last in success rate and you're last in those type of metrics, it's not a good thing. None of the other great running backs are down there with him. So it's one of those situations where he wasn't incredible with Ben Johnson. He was a lower end RB2. Those snaps could maybe increase a little bit. He's got familiarity. It's really good receiving work. But he has finished as the RB15 to RB24, aka like a lower end RB2, in 4 of the last 5 years. And I think that's just kind of what it's going to be again. It's tough to guess the other running backs in that situation, but I think that Johnson, Monangai, and whoever else will steal enough, and it's not Detroit. I love Ben Johnson, and I love all the help that he can bring to Chicago and all the weapons there, but Detroit was able to supply so many weapons with fantasy success, at least 4 on a week-to-week basis, 5 if you're counting like Jameson and Laporta. But still, Chicago isn't going to be number one offense in the NFL this year. At least I wouldn't expect. Would be cool if they were, but I don't expect that. I think Swift is going to be that lower end RB2. Isaiah Pacheco. So many of these guys in this range make me mad because they're hard to rank. Pacheco is one of those guys. He is not 100% deserving of his volume. His efficiency was horrible last year, but mainly because of the injury. And it's never been amazing. Like, we got to remember, like, he's not Saquon Barkley. He's a 7th round draft pick. So it's a little bit different there. If he got his early 2024 volume, pre-injury, like 2 games, then he's going to be an RB1 this year. Like, the offense is still great. Offensive line took a little bit of a dip, but he'd still be an RB1. I'm just not confident that he's going to get that volume. Last year, he was RB51 in volume in games with Kareem Hunt. They're both kind of just 3 yards in a cloud of dust nowadays, so they bring in just Brashard Smith. They don't really bring in too many guys. That shows some confidence. I think he'll have some weeks where he's kind of that guy and can get 15-plus touches and can be valuable. But I think it'll be just kind of back and forth. Like, I don't know if Kansas City is really going to just, like, hand over a ton of volume to him. Because, yeah, they drafted Brashard Smith in the 7th round. It's not, like, too much draft capital. But also, Pacheco was a 7th-round pick, too. Kareem Hunt was a free agent. Like, they don't really have anybody in that offense that is really that supreme talent in there that is going to dominate the volume, I would say. Tony Pollard, I liked him a lot worse, or didn't like him nearly as much when Tajay Spears was healthy. The Tajay Spears injury is very important because that poor offensive line play, that volume that he gets, and the lack of receiving because of Tajay, not even lack of receiving, but not amazing receiving because Tajay, I would say, is a better receiving back than him. But he's one of 2 players with Derrick Henry the past 2 years to have 300-plus touches. And he's just kind of been a lower-end RB2 with 300-plus touches. So if you're taking a little bit of that away with a healthy Tajay Spears, there's some problems. The offense isn't amazing. The offensive line is not the greatest. So I think he's just one of those other guys that's going to be like in the 20s at the end of the year. He's pretty solid some weeks, pretty not that good the other weeks. Joe Mixon is after that. It's another guy that's hard to rank. Like, I want to kind of rank him even lower. It's tough because we're kind of getting this range where it's like, oh, well, if Joe Mixon is suddenly healthy, he could be an RB1, I guess, but it's just not looking good. Trivia, should have said this before his name popped up. It's kind of ruined. It's a lot better with Derrick Henry earlier. But who is the running back to be a RB1 for 4 straight seasons? There is one in the entire NFL. Yes, the answer is Joe Mixon, but not just 4 straight times, more than anybody else, but he's done it 6 straight times. The next closest is half of that with 3. 6 straight seasons as a top 12 running back 1 in points per game. I'm just not much of a believer anymore, sadly, both with the age and the injuries and the offensive line play. The injury last year, but then just the injury right now that he's dealing with, it's never good to have this much injury talk in the preseason and this much injury talk basically saying, oh yeah, it's going to linger into the season. Then they bring in Nick Chubb. They bring in Woody Marks. I'm not a huge believer in Nick Chubb, but adding those guys in with, again, another guy who, like a Josh Jacobs, his receiving dipped a ton last year on this new team, and the offensive line play is horrible. So that volume takes a dip. He's already injured. He's aging. The receiving isn't there. Like, there's just a bunch of red flags, and he's never really been a top 5 guy. He's actually never had a top 5 finish in fantasy. So he was a running back 1 6 straight times. Every single time it was 6 to 12. So I don't think he's going to destroy you if you pass on him as like the ADP RB24 or whatever he is now. Jordan Mason is right after that, and my love for Mason is actually more of an anti-Aaron Jones agenda, I would say. Nothing against him, but I just like Jordan Mason a lot. They paid Aaron Jones, yes, but they also gave up a decent amount of money and assets for Jordan Mason. Like, he's getting top 15 running back money, and they traded some picks for him on top of that. The offensive line is good. There's been rumors of him getting more receiving, which could be huge, just given last year. And a fun stat that I love, he was second in explosive carry percentage last season to Jahmyr Gibbs, for example. They had the second most 8-man boxes played in the NFL. So with their situation last year, the offensive line, like when he was in the game, they were running the ball a ton, and the defenses against them had 8-man boxes, the second most in the NFL. And he still had the second highest explosive carry rate. I like him as a talent. I'm not overly worried about moving from the Shanahan system to a different system where a lot of those guys have failed. Two reasons. One, I'm a believer in Kevin O'Connell, another great play caller. And two, San Francisco's offense was kind of a mess last year. Like, it wasn't an incredible situation. That offensive line was injured and wasn't fully the same. So I'm not overly worried in that way. And I think he can be at minimum the 1B in this offense in getting the goal line work over Aaron Jones. And I think he has the potential to be the 1A in an offense that has historically, at least with Kevin O'Connell, been really good. So I like it a lot. Travis Etienne right after that, there's a lower chance that Etienne hits, but if he does, it could be amazing. He could easily be an RB1. And I don't think that's foolish to say at all because 2 seasons ago, not last year, but the year before that, he was the RB7, leading the NFL in missed tackles and was the RB7 a year and a half ago. So I think the ceiling is still there. The offensive line is better. The coaching is way better. And the receiving could be special. Liam Cohen uses the running backs a ton of screen game work. Lots of targets in general, really high route rate. Yeah, he uses multiple running backs, but that can make up for it, especially this late in drafts. I think his offense can be sneaky good. I like him a lot if he is that guy. I think he's a really, really good RB2 with RB1 upside, and you can get him for pretty cheap. J.K. Dobbins, which is another guy that I like in general. He was RB18 last year, and he didn't have incredible volume, and it was in a worse situation. So yeah, he's not going to get probably over 50% of the running back volume as alone, maybe a little bit more, at least at the start of the season. But the situation is incredible, better than it was in Los Angeles. He has proven that he can be a really good running back, has the receiving chops that I think people just kind of dismiss because we look at the teams he's been on, like he was Lamar Jackson on the Ravens, they never throw to running backs, and then last year, same thing in his 1 year in Los Angeles, but he still had way more receiving than a Gus Edwards, for example. Like, he isn't Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards had 5 catches last year. Dobbins had 38. It's a little bit different. After that is where I have Aaron Jones, who, yes, did get that contract. That is helpful, but he is a PPR only. Half PPR standard, I wouldn't even think about it. The touchdown upside is just so low. 4 straight seasons where his touchdowns per attempt is under 2.5%. Part of that is because he just can't score on the goal line anymore. Like, he's just not built for that. The rushing value overall is just insanely low. And he did have decreasing points per game in 4 straight years before last year. I thought he was dead. He kind of was revived. But a lot of times when that happens and you're kind of decreasing, something kind of changes. You go way up, and then you kind of go back down. And I think that's what's about to happen with Aaron Jones. I don't really get the upside with Jordan Mason being in there. I don't know. Not for me. Tank Bigsby after that. Similar to Travis Etienne. I am fine with any of these Jaguars running backs. If you took all 3, that's maybe weird, but any of them can take over this backfield. And if one of them does, they're going to be amazing in fantasy. If you are drafting them as RB 15, 20, 25, yeah, then maybe that's not smart strategy. But when you're drafting him as RB 30, 40, and 50, I don't mind it. He's an underrated runner. Like I said, the scheme and the offensive line improved. That running scheme was amazing for Bucky Irving. Tank Bigsby can be like that in a way, and his efficiency, those metrics in terms of the analytics, look really good. One of these guys is going to get the 1A role. And another guy that could increase his receiving, he didn't get anything last year at all. He was dead last in percent of his points per game coming from PPR. So not getting too much receiving. But in the preseason, we've already seen a couple targets his way. So if they use him at all, which they used Rachaad White and Bucky Irving last year in the receiving game a bunch, if he gets some of that, he gets the goal line work, some pretty good rushing, I really like Tank Bigsby because I do believe he has talent. I like him overall. Quinshon Judkins, and obviously like a weird one to rank as well. The offensive line isn't great anymore. And I think a lot of people will just assume that it's the Browns. They're going to have a really good running game, really good offensive line. That's not really the case anymore. They didn't run the ball at all last year, and part of that was because the offensive line was injured and not really good. It is kind of just a mess of an offense. I love the coaching, and that's kind of it. Like, they don't really have much else. The quarterback situation is horrible. The defense is okay, but they're not going to score many points, in my opinion. So he can be a team's wide receiver or team's running back 1. That gives him some value there, but I don't think he's going to be that miles better in volume compared to, say, a Jerome Ford or a Dylan Sampson or anything like that And when you're not getting 100% of the running back touches in an offense like that, it's tough to find some value. Zach Charbonnet, if Walker does play 17 games this year, and I draft Sharp RB33, oh well. I don't know. Like, he was the RB5 last season. Over 18 touches per game, 100% of the goal line work. And that situation and offensive line, main part of that, has gotten better. And he was the RB5. So yeah, it might only happen for a few games this year. It could happen all 17 games. Who knows? It could happen in the fantasy playoffs. Who knows? But you are drafting a guy that is basically a guaranteed RB1 for whatever amount of games that Kenneth Walker misses. I think that is so much more valuable than so many running backs in this range. So yeah, he's being drafted in like the 40s for a running back, maybe high 30s now. But I have him this high because I would rather have that for 5 games, 3 games, than an okay flex player that I can get off waivers and matchup dependent and be fine that way. But Charbonnet is going to be a difference. It just depends on how many games. Caleb Johnson after that, I don't get it. I like him as a prospect, actually. Like, I like Caleb Johnson out of college. I really was hoping he'd land in a good spot. In terms of long term, Mike Tomlin can be really good for running backs. It's a great history there. But in 2025, it's weird. We had one of the best running back prospects of the decade go to a team with a Jaylen Warren type of running back, Arthur Smith as the play caller, a better offensive line, and massively underperform. And now we're expecting the round 2 running back in a worse situation with Arthur Smith calling plays to magically be way better. I don't get it. 18%. Oh, he's a round 3 running back, not even round 2. And 18% of round 3 running backs hit in year 1. Hit as in 12 points per game. You can start them weekly. 18%. And this is the 18% you guys want to bet on? It's not for me. I already have him over 20 spots below his ADP. I feel like I have him ranked higher than what I actually like him, but it's hard because it's like, oh, I already have him 2 rounds below his ADP right now. And I get it because he is a talented guy, but it's a horrible spot. Like, it's a pretty horrible spot. There's other red flags. There's other things like even the Jonnu Smith toss sweeps, like that sort of stuff. Like, I don't think he is the ever clear number 1 guy in this offense. And if he is, Rodgers is going to audible out at the 1-yard line anyways and just throw it to somebody. It's what he does every single play. Like, we saw this with Breece Hall last year without Arthur Smith, and he was horrible with Aaron Rodgers last season. I'm not a believer in Arthur Smith at all. I'm not a believer in Aaron Rodgers at all. I'm not a believer in this offense. And to draft a guy that is right now the 1B with a bunch of red flags, it seems really high. His ADP is well above this ranking. I'm going to do the Giants running backs next, kind of together since I do have them close. It is tougher. It is really annoying, but it looks like Singletary is still going to be relevant in the offense. So I think a lot of people are automatically thinking like, oh, it's going to be Tracy Jr. 50% and Cam Scatterbo 50%. Oh my gosh. But those two. And I don't really think it is. I think it's going to be 33% and 33% and Singletary for 34%, which is annoying. Tracy Jr. will probably be 34%. But besides the point, it's tough because they're both good receiving backs. Scatterbo will probably be the goal line guy there, but it's an offense that is not the greatest. And when you're having a committee running backs in an offense that isn't the best, not the greatest. Tajay Spears after that, I want to rank him a lot higher, but he got injured and he broke my heart. The injury is still up in the air. It's probably only going to be a couple weeks, but that's tough just because if you're injured the first couple weeks, it can be up until week 5 until you're actually meaningful in fantasy. And who knows there? He has the upside, though. He is a talented running back that gets injured a lot, sadly, but we saw in the fantasy playoffs last year, he averaged 20-plus points per game. And if you were playing him, you probably won your league, as in just throwing in a random guy to add to your juggernaut team that's scoring 20-plus points per game. I think he's a better running back at this point than Tony Pollard, when he is healthy, obviously. Receiving is there. It always has been in his 2 years and obviously going back to college and that sort of stuff. But he's a very talented guy. I like him in this range, even with the injury, just because I think he does bring upside. Jaden Blue, similar to that too. Like my Jordan Mason and a couple others other guys. A lot of this pro-blue is actually just an anti-Javonte Williams agenda. I am not high on Williams. I definitely don't believe in Miles Sanders there. Dallas, their rushing game is going to be horrible probably. But if Jaden Blue can take a lot of that volume, get the receiving there, which could be big, he's being drafted in the 40s, and he could be a team's RB1. So is the rushing game going to be super valuable? Probably not, but I think he's the most talented player there. And when you get a talented, somewhat talented at least player that can be a team's RB1, he can get volume and he can bring you value. The offense, I think, will be okay. The offense will be better than average at least. So I think there's value there. I just don't believe in Miles Sanders or Javonte Williams at all. I think Javonte Williams was bad last year, and this situation is 10 times worse than it was last year. And Ramondre Stevenson kind of rounding out this top 40 with Ray Davis. It's a very similar situation where he and Najee and a couple of these guys are kind of in that same boat. Javonte Williams, another one, where they're just kind of RB2s that are going to be bench players and not the greatest. And then if they are a handcuff eventually down the line, then they'll be solid. But there's other handcuffs that are better for that reason, so why not just take them if that's where their actual value is coming in? Ramondre, again, like Henderson, the offense and offensive line isn't amazing, and Trayvon Henderson is just way more talented than him. I think he has a lot more mistakes compared to Henderson that will get him off the field. Henderson doesn't fumble. He is the best pass-protecting running back in the draft, probably in the last few years. Stevenson, not bad in that, solid goal line runner, but he also led the NFL in fumbles and has other mistakes like that. There's just not much value there for me anymore. Ray Davis, though, right after that, I'm going to move him above Ramondre, actually. I've decided in the moment. Ray Davis, the second best handcuff, in my opinion. We've seen him one time without James Cook, and he lit it up. Was incredible. Like I've talked about with James Cook, I think there's chance for flex value. I think there's chance for a volume improvement. Their efficiency metrics, everything like that, in the same exact offense, pretty much the same. I really like him this year. 7th best points per snap. Remember that stat. 7th best in fantasy points per snap last season. And if you want to see it, here's my 41 to 50 in terms of running backs. It's a lot of guys like the Ramondre Stevenson in terms of Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, Rachaad White to a better extent maybe, and Jaylen Warren, where there's just no ceiling. Jaylen Warren's a red because there is no ceiling. He's the second most talented running back in a horrible situation, and he's being drafted this high because he's had fantasy relevance in the past. But are we looking at this year? I am. And even as a handcuff, like I said, just a solid flex value. So same thing on the same line with Najee and Rachaad White. I just have them below because they are injured. If they weren't injured, they'd be above Jaylen Warren. Braylon Allen is a lesser version of Ray Davis on obviously what is a worse offense. Brian Robinson, I'm slotting him in here. People will have him higher. I'm not going to be higher on Brian Robinson still. I just don't believe in the talent as a whole. He's not really getting much receiving, especially obviously with CMC there. That's never going to be a fact. But even as a handcuff, I think he's going to be fighting for work against Garendo. So it's not any amazing situation there. I have Garendo there at 50. Javonte Williams, we don't love. He had an incredible offensive line, incredible receiving, and he wasted all of it and is now in a situation that is the exact opposite of that. Not good receiving for running backs, not good offensive line. And these other guys, I'll raise Jacory Crosky-Merritt. That is my question to you. So if you have an opinion, where would you put JCM after the Brian Robinson trade? This is pre-Brian Robinson trade. I just haven't moved him yet. So what do you guys think? Where would you put him in this offense compared to all these other guys, whether it's 40 or above this list?